Brisbane home prices are still climbing faster than most other Australian cities. A major parliamentary report could bring sweeping changes to e-scooter and e-bike rules across Queensland. And new research has revealed something surprising about life expectancy in Brisbane. Adam here with the weekly update on what's happening across Greater Brisbane. In this overview video, we'll take a look at the biggest stories affecting the region as a whole this week, and then in the other videos we'll dive into what's been happening in Brisbane, Ipswich, Logan, Moreton Bay and the Redlands. This video is sponsored by YB Painting Services. There's a bit to get through this week, including new housing data, a parliamentary inquiry into e-mobility safety, developments around the 2032 Olympics, and some new research revealing stark health differences between neighbouring suburbs. Let's get updated. Housing prices across Greater Brisbane continue to climb, according to the latest data from Inequality. Even though the pace of growth has slowed, the scale of the boom over the past few years has been extraordinary. Over the past 5 years, Brisbane dwelling values have roughly doubled, pushing the city's median dwelling value to around the $1 million mark. That kind of growth would have seemed hard to imagine not long ago, but strong population growth and limited housing supply have helped keep upward pressure on prices. Southeast Queensland is adding tens of thousands of new residents each year, with many arriving from interstate in search of relatively more affordable housing and lifestyle opportunities. At the same time, the rental market is showing some signs of strain. New PropTrack analysis suggests rents have actually fallen in around 1 in 10 suburbs over the past year nationally, including a few pockets of Brisbane such as Yeronpilly, Tennyson and Bald Hills. However, those declines remain the exception rather than the rule, with rents still rising in more than 4 out of 5 suburbs nationwide. The rapid rise in prices is also prompting debate on how sustainable the current market is. Some analysts argue Brisbane may now be among the most overvalued housing markets in Australia when comparing prices with local incomes after several years of rapid growth. Others say strong migration into southeast Queensland combined with ongoing housing shortages could continue to support prices for some time. But another issue affecting many people across Greater Brisbane right now is the rapid growth of e-mobility device use. The Queensland Parliament has now tabled the long-awaited report from its inquiry into e-mobility safety. The inquiry examined the rapid rise of devices such as e-scooters and e-bikes and heard from more than 1,200 submitters and over 140 witnesses. Evidence presented to the committee showed more than 6,300 people attended emergency departments in Queensland with e-mobility related injuries in the year to March 2025. More than 200 of those cases involved major trauma, and over 60 patients required intensive care, most commonly for serious head and facial injuries. 12 people died in e-mobility incidents in Queensland last year, including several children. The report also highlighted concerns about lithium-ion battery fires linked to these devices, particularly where damaged or poorly manufactured batteries were involved. In response, the committee made 28 recommendations aimed at improving safety. Among the key proposals is introducing a minimum rider age of 16 for e-bikes and personal mobility devices. Another recommendation is requiring riders to hold at least a Queensland learner driver's licence, meaning they would need to complete the Prep-L Road Rules learning program. The inquiry also proposes reducing maximum speeds on footpaths to 10 km per hour. Another major recommendation is the creation of a 2-tier regulatory system. Devices capable of travelling faster than 25 km per hour would be classified as motor vehicles, meaning they would require registration, insurance and a licensed rider. Police would also be given stronger powers, including the ability to seize illegal devices. The Queensland Government will now consider the report and decide whether to implement some or all of the proposed reforms. A little later we'll also look at how debate is intensifying around where Olympics rowing events should be held for the Brisbane 2032 Games, but first some new research has revealed stark health differences between neighbouring suburbs across Greater Brisbane. Researchers from the University of Queensland have recently mapped health outcomes across Brisbane using train stations as geographic reference points. What they found was a surprisingly large variation in life expectancy between suburbs that are sometimes only a few kilometres apart. One example highlighted in the research compares Murarrie and Cannon Hill, which sit just over a kilometre apart along the Cleveland rail line. Despite their close proximity, women living in Murarrie were found to die around 15 years earlier on average than women living in Cannon Hill. Similar patterns appear elsewhere across the city. Along the Redcliffe Peninsula line, men living near Zilmere had a median age of death around 72 years, roughly 10 years lower than those living nearby in Geebung. Researchers say these differences reflect a combination of factors including income levels, employment opportunities, education, housing stability, healthcare access, and the availability of parks and green space. These kinds of patterns also appear in broader national data. New analysis released by the Australian Bureau of Statistics highlights levels of advantage and disadvantage across Australia. The data shows that even within the same city, neighbouring suburbs can experience very different socio-economic conditions. These differences can influence long-term outcomes, including education opportunities, employment prospects, and health outcomes. Urban planners sometimes use this type of data to identify areas where infrastructure investment and community programs may have the greatest impact. Another area where households are responding to economic pressures is energy. Across southeast Queensland, more households are beginning to install home battery systems alongside rooftop solar. A major factor driving this trend is the federal government's Cheaper Home Batteries program, which provides rebates that reduce the upfront costs of installing battery storage. Home batteries allow households to store excess solar energy generated during the day and use it later in the evening when electricity demand and prices tend to be higher. For households that already have rooftop solar, a battery can significantly increase the proportion of energy they use themselves rather than exporting it back to the grid for increasingly low reward. In the federal electorate of Bonner, covering parts of Brisbane's eastern suburbs and the Redlands, more than 1,800 home batteries have now been installed. Supporters say programs like this can reduce household energy bills while helping stabilise the electricity grid. Adding a battery is one way to upgrade your home, but another is the transformation a fresh paint job can bring, and the sponsor of this video, YB Painting, is offering a discount on their exceptional services. They recently won 2 first and 3 second place awards in the Master Painters Australia Queensland Awards for 2025, and when you see their professionalism and the quality of their workmanship, it's no surprise. With fixed pricing and a 5-year warranty on all their work, you can be sure there'll be no unpleasant surprises. Claim your 10% discount by scanning this QR code or the link in the video description. The Queensland Government has also announced a new $1 million grant program aimed at restoring koala habitat across southeast Queensland. Community groups will be able to apply for grants of up to $75,000 for projects such as tree planting, habitat restoration, and wildlife corridor management. The funding comes alongside consultation on a new Southeast Queensland koala conservation strategy. However, some conservation groups say the proposed strategy still has significant gaps. The Koala Action Group argues the plan does not go far enough in protecting remaining koala habitat from development. They've also raised concerns that the strategy relies heavily on voluntary restoration programs rather than stronger planning protections. Another criticism is the lack of clear population recovery targets for koalas in southeast Queensland. Public consultation on the strategy is currently open. Turning to the Olympics. Organisers of the Brisbane 2032 Games say they're working to ensure the operational costs of the event do not fall on taxpayers. Speaking at a sports business conference in the US, Organising Committee President Andrew Liveris said the Games would rely heavily on commercial partnerships and sponsorships. He also acknowledged that Brisbane and Queensland are still relatively unknown internationally compared with cities such as Sydney and Melbourne. Meanwhile, debate continues about where Olympic rowing events should be held. The plan currently supported by the state government involves staging rowing events on the Fitzroy River in Rockhampton. However, some athletes have raised concerns about the site. Among them is decorated Australian Paralympian Curtis McGrath, a multiple-time world champion and gold medalist in the canoe sprint. McGrath has questioned whether the Fitzroy River could provide the calm, consistent water conditions needed for Olympic-level rowing. Critics have pointed to variable river conditions as potential challenges for maintaining a fair racing course. Another issue is distance. Rockhampton sits roughly 600 kilometres north of Brisbane, which could create logistical challenges for athletes and officials. Alternative locations closer to Brisbane have been suggested, such as the purpose-built venue recently proposed by Moreton Bay City Council, although no final decision has been made. The Queensland Greens have also proposed the creation of a new public holiday linked to the Olympics. Under the proposal, a Games Day holiday would be introduced on the second last Friday in July each year starting in 2027. The date would eventually coincide with the opening ceremony of the Brisbane 2032 Olympic Games. The proposal forms part of a broader campaign the Greens are calling the Olympics for the People.
An Olympics for the People, it starts with a new public holiday, but ultimately it has to include more public housing, better public transport, and a greener city in Brisbane.
Turning to crime and policing. Queensland Police say more than 1,300 people have now been charged as part of Operation Stealer in Brisbane South. Since the operation began in October last year, officers have laid more than 4,000 charges involving offences such as break-ins, robberies, and stolen vehicles. Both adults and youth offenders have been charged as part of the operation. At the same time, the Queensland Government is expanding its adult crime, adult time laws. The legislation proposes increasing the number of offences covered by the policy to 45. New offences proposed for inclusion include assault occasioning bodily harm, stalking, conspiring to murder, and administering poison with intent to harm. One offence that has attracted particular attention relates to aiding suicide, including situations where bullying contributes to a suicide. Supporters say tougher sentencing sends a strong message and helps protect victims, while critics argue harsher penalties do not address the underlying causes of youth crime and may increase long-term re-offending. The Queensland Government has also revised its proposed hate speech legislation. The bill expands bans on extremist hate symbols and increases penalties for offences targeting places of worship. Under the revised proposal, the Attorney General would be able to ban additional hate symbols through regulation if they are likely to incite hatred or violence. However, any banned phrases would need to be approved by Parliament following criticism of the original draft, where banned phrases could be dictated by the Attorney General. The legislation would also allow police to conduct warrantless searches in certain situations where officers suspect someone may be displaying prohibited hate symbols. Before we wrap up, a quick community note. I've got a small giveaway this week. 10 Admit 2 tickets to cold storage. When a highly contagious mutating fungus escapes a sealed facility, 2 young employees joined by a grizzled bioterror operative must survive the wildest night shift ever to save humanity, as the microorganism spreads and destroys everything in its path. To enter, head to the Brisbane Channel's Instagram page and follow the instructions on the relevant post. If you're a channel member, let me know your YouTube username and you'll get an extra entry into the draw. So those are some of the biggest stories affecting Greater Brisbane as a whole this week. If you'd like to see what's been happening in each local area, I've broken the updates down into separate videos for Brisbane, Ipswich, Logan, Moreton Bay and the Redlands. You can jump into those on screen now or follow the full update series to stay in the loop on everything that's been happening across Greater Brisbane this week. See you there.